Our brains have been systematically programmed to be very small, to focus on this reality, right? We use 10% of our 10% of our waking reality is governed by our conscious mind. 90% of our waking reality is governed by our subconscious mind. So much information has been tucked into our subconscious reality, including the concept of us as infinite beings. We have been closed off to the idea of our infinite nature, our multidimensional nature, and that statistic is so disturbing. And I don't ever go into why, right? But here we are. And studying sacred geometry can help you access and help us access that 90% of our potential sitting over there in our subconscious mind. And it's just one tool, right? Dreams, psychedelics, all of the things that we have to access the more that we are, our sensory capacities, our heightened states of consciousness. Anyway, 90%, we're going to reclaim it a little bit because we start to focus on that structural reality that is everywhere, that is space-time, that is infinite, right? We can try to conceptualize infinity. We can try to conceptualize of this space-time universal consciousness, but it's like a foreign language for us. And so geometry gives us a finite structure to contain the infinite, the infinite. Okay? We've got to have something that anchors us in this reality and learn that it can scale infinitely small and infinitely large, quantum to the cosmological. We need that structure to help us bridge from the third dimension, this lovely little reality that is 99.99999%, right? Is the subconscious realm, is the larger, is the infinite, is what's real. And we've been given 0.00001% to focus on. We've been given the material world, this tiny dimension. So we want to get to the more. We want to start contemplating our infinite nature. We want a way to tap space-time, if you will, and geometry is the way. So I think that's my preamble, right? That's the that's the overview, and I'm excited to be having a conversation with you. I'm just kind of checking in my mind to see if there's anything else, but I think we're ready for this. I think we're ready for the show. Yeah, I think we're going to go into the geometry that helps us bridge the finite into the infinite. So we'll touch on a couple of shapes, and I've been really getting into the phi ratio. So we're going to dive in with that. And I'm going to bring some slides in that sort of illustrate what I've been talking about. So we're going to get into the phi ratio. Oh, I hope I can share. Oh man, I hope I can screen share. Yay. Okay, great. So, right. There we go. Slideshow. One of the things that I like to keep in mind is that we're moving from the invisible to the visible, right? The geometry bridges us from the unknown universe to the known universe, right? Which is part of the connection, part of the bridge, right? It's bringing us into wholeness. Right? So the beautiful phi ratio, right? This infinitely spiraling shape and pattern. We know this inherently. It's everywhere in our world, right? And it's this natural form that happens because it's in perfect balance, right? It's in this harmonic ratio to ourself. And I love these slides. These are kind of like the non-traditional, like, hey, here's the phi ratio everywhere, because it's this organic pattern, right? We don't even think about it. It just exists. And it's in, again, it's in everything, right? And I learned about the phi, like, kind of in this basic way. And then as I evolved, and like literally only in the last couple of years have I gone deeply into the study of the phi. And I know I've only scratched the surface, right? And it's in the natural world. It's in our physical world. We're going to look at our biology, that it's, there as well. But it's also in our man-made world, right? It's also used to influence our psyche. I'm not going into that at all. I'm just going to make that point, that beginning to work with this ratio, with this harmonic pattern, is going to connect you to how it's influencing you and how it's being used to influence you. Because it's, when something is so in balance, and when something is so harmonic, it is truly powerful. And that power can be used to create galaxies, give the structure of the universe, manipulate our psyches in that 10% of our, waking reality. It's again, it's talking archetypal structure. It's speaking to our subconscious and numbers and patterns, where we're connected to this larger scale, this infinite scale, this geometry that can help us comprehend levels of galactic scale, and also connect with levels of the quantum scale, right? This is the shape, one of the shapes, but this is really like a fundamental shape that then connects us and helps us understand the I guess just the connection, right? That word, I keep coming back to that connection, but it's the bridge, right? And you've got that galactic scale, and then you can bring it down to the galactic essence within us, right? Our DNA is based on this beautiful spiraling shape, and it's got so much of it that's harmonizing, right? It's this combination of a flowing spiral shape that has a creative expression to it, typically associated with the divine feminine, right? And then you've got this linear, structural, mathematic equation, commonly more thought of as like the divine masculine, right? The left brain and the right brain. So you've got, it's like a full package. You've got everything. You've got the harmonizing of divine masculine and the divine feminine. And we're on the spectrum, wherever we are, gender identity, it's all in us, that divinity, that genderless divinity. And then we've got the balance, right? The balance that's created when we align that male and female principle, when we align the right and left hemispheres of the brain, it creates that harmony. It creates a harmony that never ends, the infinite nature, right? And that's been really comforting, that piece that it never ends. It's predictable. And it's always the same. It's infinitely the same. It's a structure that holds all potential and all possibility in that balance, in that harmony. So we've got this shape. I mean, we're not even going into the proportion of 1 to 1.618, right? There's so much in this shape. We're going to go into the unstructured flow, although it's kind of a structured flow. And we're going to look at the Fibonacci sequence, right? Which is this beautiful mathematic equation. This is where I've come to love mathematics, right? The phi ratio helped me integrate that, I would say right brain, spiritual, metaphysical, expansive, non-structured flow into the necessary counterpart, right? Like you can't just flow out. You've got to have some anchor point, right? Or you can, but it's going to go better if you're anchored, right? And there happens to be a mathematic equation that represents that anchor. And it's simple, it's beautiful in its simplicity. And it adds on itself or subtracts from itself infinite, right? So the numbers will go into the negative realms, negative decimals, but we're not gonna, that's harder to track. When it adds on itself, you can see here, it's the fundamental equation of 1 and 2 is 3, and 2 and 3 is 5, 3 and 5 is 8. On and on, it will simply add these two integers, right? Or subtract. It doesn't need anything else. It is perfect within itself. And that's part of the resonance. That's why in art and architecture, we're drawn to these pieces that have this proportion inherently in them, right? So I was saying that I've moved from the metaphysical into appreciating the mathematics. And this slide represents what I mean by that. Because you can think that the metaphysical is the direct way, the only way, the way to God, source consciousness, higher self, future self, however you conceptualize of the larger. You can think the metaphysical is closer, but I have started to find closeness to divinity in math, which I never thought I'd say, but this slide represents why, right? So phi ratio, here's that phi equation, right? We read it, we're going to read it across, right? 1 and 1 is 2, and 2 and 3 is 5, and on, and it will just go on to infinity. 89 plus 144 is 233. 144 and 233, on and on. The harmonics of the numbers are super cool. Here's the deal. You can also read this equation from the top down, right? So on the right-hand column, 2 and 3 is 5, 2 and 5 is 8, 8 and 13, 21, and on, right? So that's kind of cool that we've got reading it to the right, reading it up and down, and fascinating, right? But it gets better. You can read it down from the left column as well. 1 and 1 is 2, 3 and 5 is 8, on, right? So now you've got reading it from left to right. You've got reading it from top to bottom infinitely on the right-hand column, reading it the same way, the same equation on the left-hand column, and then check out the middle column. It's the same thing. You find the equation every way. And then conversely, negative, like moving into the infinitely smaller by reading it backwards. So every single way you read this equation, it's going to add up to the same thing. To me, that's God. That indicates a higher orchestration, right? Something else is going on. Our little brains didn't come up with that. This is pre-human. This is another thing that takes me to advanced civilizations, right? It takes me to the larger structure of space-time, right? It takes me beyond the human experience. And I just started to see math as I don't want to say God, but math as deeply connected to source, right? Not some sort of traumatic 10th grade experience where I learned this barbaric calculus and arithmetic and types of things, but substantive, deep, profound, and totally complementary to the areas that I'm drawn to. So it's all God, basically. And I never thought I'd say that. So the phi ratio really gets us back to showing us the fundamental principles of this reality. And then you can apply that ratio, right? 2 and 3 is 5, to our entire bodies, right? We are that proportion. We are that harmonic ratio. And so getting into that fundamental structure helps connect us with the God that is outside of us and the God that is within us, and that there's no separation. And that the geometry is what bridges both. Right? So we're going to look at our DNA in a little while, a little bit more, but best illustration, I think, of our geometry, our geometric structure, right? That spiral, those proportions, and then the bridge, right? I want to encourage everyone to get out and look at the sky, right? And get that, look at the stars if you can. We just had the Perseid, the meteor shower, but contemplating that we are the same, we are connected through the geometry. And we're just going to name the fractalizing aspect of the phi, right? That it spirals on and creates these beautiful patterns, galaxies, mathematic ratios that come together to form the Mandelbrot set, right? Many of us who know the fractalizing aspect know that Mandelbrot is the representative form that is self-repeating and infinitely so, right? It's this self-repeating fractalizing pattern in specific form. This is, again, the finite that contains the infinite, this pattern that will continue to replicate and divide space-time. So let's see where I went next. I think that I went from the fundamental structure of phi back to how it's been covered up, right? You've got this geometry of infinity. And this is the process that I mentioned earlier, right? We have covered that up. We've said, oh, here's a mathematic ratio. We like a mathematic ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, because even though it doesn't have an ending, it has more measurable units, right? We've swept infinity under the rug, right? And physics, let me just come out with this for a second. We can't handle the concept of infinity, whether it's in the metaphysical realms or in the empirical data realms. And so standard model physics, right? This is the actual term. It's called renormalization. And they basically said, we're not comfortable with anything that ends with infinity, even though most equations, when you go in depth, they end in infinity, right? This is the natural progression of the expression of our consciousness, physical and immaterial world. And we couldn't get empirical data. We couldn't get measurable units out of infinity. And we need that data to base our material world on, right? To justify scientific process and scientific exploration. And so renormalization resulted in what we know as dark matter, and in a different way, junk DNA, right? So I want us to really get this aspect of infinity that sits here all the time in 90% of our subconscious minds that we've also called dark matter, and we haven't contemplated infinity. So this is an invitation to start doing that. And part of that is to realize that it's been covered up, right? It's very powerful to contemplate why, why did this stuff, why was this intentionally kept from us? That is such a big question. Like, I'm not even going into that, but it's part of the exploration. So developing intuition and knowledge about that search, for the why things have been covered up and why we've been kept small. Fascinating exploration. I'm not going into it, and proceed with caution, because there's some dark stuff out there, right? It has the ability, dark and the light, right? Phi ratio, harmonizing both. We need both. We live in a polarity. I choose to focus on the light. But it's good to name, right? It's good to name that our profession, our entire structure of understanding the universe has been reduced so that we could have units of measurement, and that if you think about the idea that the concept of infinity doesn't support our theories, then that ought to make us question the theories, right? That suggests standard model physics is insufficient and not complete. Oh shoot, the word. I want to say unfulfilling, but that's not it. But we need a new physics, right? We need Nassim Haramein and a bunch of others are on the cutting edge of creating, unified physics, right? Where it's not this reductionist, inaccurate, illogical almost platform. Like you can say that all of our the structure of our reality is based on falsehoods, false assumptions, and false equations, right? And you can even go to E equals MC squared, right? Like, bless his heart, right? Einstein was onto it, but that he didn't finish. He wasn't able to complete his work in terms of proving actually what energy is, proving mass, proving space-time, right? He came up with the equation, but we don't even have evidence, serious evidence. Like we think, oh, I know what mass is. It's this material world. It feels real, but there's no equation to substantiate it. Same with space and space-time. Like we're working well to quantify these things, and we thought we did. But to begin to say, what if we haven't? What if we've been off? What if we've left out dark matter? What happens when we bring it in? How does that change the equation? How does that make energy? How does that change energy when we move towards really defining it? Like we could move from this idea of limited energy sources, right? Scarcity, right? This idea that there's not enough energy, right? If you start to define it differently, if you start to find an infinite source, right, that changes everything.